Good morning, everybody. Apparently this is not working, so we're all going to share this handheld. So this hotel and myself and vis-a-vis technology are not in agreement, so we'll just put that there. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is the third of the composer panels, and you see the hair color is a little different this morning as opposed to yesterday morning. You see the older set here, myself included. I'm Frank DeKelly, and it's a pleasure to have this chance to moderate this panel with these four wonderful composers. We have to my right John Fitzrogers from USC, the other USC, University of South Carolina. Bruce Dietz at LSU, who's professor of percussion at LSU and also a composer. David Zubay, longtime professor of composition at Indiana University. And Mike Moore from Bath, not Bath, but Bath, right? England, Bath, England. So it's a pleasure to have all of you here. And I would love to open up with just having each of you just give us a description of your work, the origins, how it came to be, just a little description about the work that's being performed or that has already been performed, if you could just sort of share that with the audience. So we'll start with John.
Well, the work that you'll hear this evening is titled Narragansett, and was commissioned by my friend and colleague Scott Weiss, who's in the audience for the University of South Carolina Wind Ensemble. This is my first piece for Wind Ensemble, so I have written a number of orchestral works, and I was very interested in trying kind of delicate, rippling effects in the wind writing. And the piece is about, for me, was inspired by a trip to Narragansett, Rhode Island, and kind of seeing the tidal pools and the crashing surf and the very kind of still surf in the morning. So in a way, it's an evocative piece for me. I think most of my music, my recent work, I tend to focus on melody and long lines. So harmonic rhythm in much of my work tends to be quite slow, with long lines and a lot of rhythmic interplay, a lot of hocketing of textures. And this was a piece where I attempted to do that same kind of thing, to have a fairly slow harmonic rhythm, but lots of emphasis on kind of slow-moving counterpoint and melody. So that's the genesis of this piece.
I have to correct my colleague, Frank. My name's actually Brett, but you said Bruce.
Oh.
I think you said Bruce.
And I have written Brett. Sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. I usually get Brent or Brad or it's fine.
I told you we're the older set.
Well, so the piece that is being performed today by the Louisiana University LSU Wind Symphony is spiritual. It's based on the African-American spiritual Give Me Jesus for alto saxophone and ensemble, obviously. It's a little strange because it's a theme and variation, but the theme doesn't happen until near the end of the piece. So it starts off with actually variation 1 and progresses that way. And that was actually an idea that my wife actually gave me, because I said, oh, I'm going to write this piece for Griff. And actually this piece was commissioned by Griff Campbell, actually. And my wife gave me the idea that, you should really have the theme in the end, and it would be really beautiful that way. And my wife's an attorney, so it was kind of like, wow, I guess I'll give that a shot. So I did, and I think it works out pretty well. So today at 4 o'clock, that's it.
Well, I'd like to thank Frank for the welcome to the older set, as much as I might object to that. And I also want to thank Scott Weiss for the performance that we'll hear tonight. I was just blown away at the run-through last night at how crisp and tight the ensemble was. It's a very chaotic, rambunctious piece, and they're really playing it well. So I'm looking forward to that. Snake Alley is an older piece. It began life as an orchestra work in 1988, I guess. Yeah, it was premiered in '89. And it came about because I played trumpet in the National Repertory Orchestra a couple summers in Colorado, and the conductor asked for a piece for the following summer. In between those 2 summers, we went on tour to Asia, playing at the Olympic Arts Festival in Korea, and then we spent time in Taiwan and Japan as well. And many of us went to visit this marketplace in Taipei called Snake Alley. I mean, we've been prepped for it at training sessions in Colorado, or preparatory sessions for what we'll be experiencing. And it was really a highlight. It was an adventure, and there's a long, detailed program note that I won't go into. If you want to read that, you can. It's probably, in my catalog, the piece that has the most clear narrative, though even in this case, I think it's important for a listener to be able to just hear the work and not have the story in front of them. It has to be a piece of music. And for a long time, I've been thinking about doing a wind ensemble version, and Scott very kindly commissioned me to get into that big project a couple years ago, and I'm very thankful for that. And look forward to tonight.
Hi there. I had my concerto for saxophone quartet and wind ensemble played yesterday by the University of Kentucky, and I was very lucky to be commissioned by Cody Birdwell, the head of wind band there, and also by the Osland Winkle saxophone quartet. I've been over here for about a week. The piece is brand new commission, and I've been lucky enough to work with the quartet, who I know quite well actually. I've written some stuff for them before, and we rehearsed it with the ensemble. And that was a great experience for me because it being a brand new piece, it also gave me a chance to change some things, because I certainly find when I write something that when you hear it first back, did I really mean that, or perhaps I'd like to add something. So I had the luxury of being able to change the piece slightly as we went along, which was a very nice thing to do. The piece itself, I've written a lot of music for saxophone quartet before. I had my own sax quartet that we used to play for quite a number of years. So I'm quite into the genre. I know how saxophones work, if you like. I wanted to integrate the quartet into the orchestra as much as possible, rather than just having an us and them thing. So I suppose rather than some of my works which might specifically feature saxophones on their own, the quartet was much more integrated, I think, this time into the orchestra. It's in 2 movements, and it has a number of compositional techniques. I should say, as a composer, which I suppose now I call myself, I've actually come from my roots are as a player. I've never had any formal training, and I started out as a classical flute player, went through playing a lot of jazz and saxophone. I kind of picked up a lot of things along the way, and I think what you said that this piece shows that. I used to play a lot of Latin bands in the past, and so there's little bits of my musical history, I suppose, have crept into the piece. And it's kind of evolved as I evolve, as I listen to more music, and I'm still actively playing. As I do that, I think my pieces tend to change, and it's probably reflected in this piece.
Stay with it. Is this your first, second, 10th work? Just pass the mic back. Just tell the audience where this is in your record. The first work for winds, or?
No, this is my first work. This is actually the 4th piece I've written for winds. I was commissioned 12 years ago to write a flute concerto for TTU. Bizarrely enough, Cody was there at the time, and also I've done a concerto for saxophone quartet, saxophone and wind ensemble, and I also did another concerto for James Galway, which hasn't actually been played there because unfortunately he fell down and broke both his arms 2 weeks before the thing. So that's called the Stockholm Suite. So I've written 4 pieces for wind ensemble. They've all been concertos, which is nice, but what I'd really like to do is get my hands on an orchestra without solos, because I think, in a way, it ties you down. So that would be something I would look forward to do next.
I've written 8 or 9 pieces for wind ensemble, I think, and maybe half of them have been written originally for wind ensemble, and some others have been transcriptions or recompositions of works. I mean, when I do that, it's not simply taking the string parts and pasting them into the saxophone parts. I'm really trying to go through the piece in detail and reconceive it for this new ensemble. Something I've been doing more and more lately, maybe being jealous of people in visual arts, you know, they work with the subject and look at it from different angles and do a whole series. I've done that with some chamber music and also these large ensemble pieces. Yeah.
This is my 7th work for wind ensemble. The piece you'll hear, as I mentioned, this is my first work for wind ensemble, although I wrote a saxophone concerto about 6 years ago for very small, kind of smaller chamber winds. So this is a little bit of a different thing for me.
Well, you all come from different environments. I mean, John, you're at University of South Carolina, and Brett, you're at LSU, but then primarily a percussion professor. And of course, David, you're at a very large composition department at IU, and Mike across the pond. So you're all coming from different places, different cultures. I'm just curious, what is the status of the wind ensemble in your environment vis-a-vis your students? Are your students interested in composing for the medium? And if so, how might their approaches differ from, say, your approaches or other composers that were your peers? For example, there's some talk yesterday about computer-generated sounds in combination with the wind ensemble. Is there an interest in that, or other non-acoustic sources, or other acoustic sources? So just want to get a sense of what they consider to be exciting to them regarding the wind ensemble, and if they're actually composing for the medium, your students. So I'll just hand it off to each of you to address that.
I think there very much is interest among my students. The composition program at South Carolina is fairly small, certainly compared to something like Indiana. My students are very much interested, and as you'll hear this evening, the wind ensemble is fantastic. So of course that generates, in its own generates quite a bit of interest among my students. With respect to whether or not they're interested in combining electronics, I think that that's actually something that doesn't just speak to wind ensemble or wind writing. I think many of my students are quite interested in figuring out ways of combining media. A number of my students have hacked into game controllers and worked with game controllers and live instruments. I think that of the younger generation, that's becoming much more, it seems sort of normal for them to make those kinds of combinations. So I think it will be exciting in the future to see how that kind of thing maps onto playing with live instruments.
My situation's a little different. I kind of live in two different, they're not two different worlds, but I'm a performer and a composer, or a composer and a performer, which I like to think I'm the second one. I want to be, I prefer myself to be thought of as a composer. But in terms of the students that I see, I don't see a lot of composition students where I teach. I do have some composition students that come and see me from other places that are very interested in writing for wind band. In fact, a lot of them come with wind band material that they want me to look at. In terms of what my students do, if I can speak for the percussion students that I see all the time when I tour and do things around the United States, they're really interested in Ableton. Does anybody know what Ableton is? Ableton is kind of like this, it's Ableton Live. It's kind of like this new, it's kind of like Logic. It's sort of like Pro Tools, then we did Logic, and now we have this Ableton Live. And this Ableton Live is good because you can use it live. There's actually different little buttons and things you can do and to produce different sounds. And the students can go in and create sounds on their own and then play along with the sounds and then actually have a keyboard, or a computer in front of them and change the sounds while they're doing it, or they can have their friend come over and do things with them. And so this program, Ableton Live, is a lot of people are using it. In fact, a lot of people in the pop fields or pop area are using it all the time. So they're really interested in this sort of chamber music that involves electronics. But in terms of the students that I see, and every once in a while at LSU, a couple students come to me and privately will see me and want some advice or something, or I'm writing for this and writing for that, can you help me out? And they are very interested in the wind ensemble as a medium. And I do my best to help them.
As Frank said, the IU composition program is pretty large, so it's hard to generalize about the students there. We feel like we accept a wide variety of students into the program. Many of them are interested in electronics, a lot of them using Macs, this program, for live interaction, more so in chamber pieces though. In terms of dissertations, we had a little issue for a while where everybody was writing an orchestra piece for their dissertation, and there became a backlog, and you might have to wait 3-4 years to hear your dissertation performed, which is not good. So through concentrated efforts with the orchestra programming, but also opening up and encouraging students to consider wind ensemble, and also the new music ensemble, which I direct, we pretty much eliminated that backlog now, so the students are hearing the dissertation right away. And the band program is certainly open and helpful in having readings of student works and dissertations program as they come along.
In England, there's not such a big tradition of wind ensembles as there is over here, I have to say. There's 5 major music colleges in England, and I think they probably do have a wind ensemble, but it's not a full-time ensemble, if you see what I mean. The tradition isn't as strong as it is over here. Having said that, there's plenty of amateur bands around, but I think it's fair to say we don't really have the tradition. I mean, in other countries in Europe, such as Sweden, they have a very strong tradition there of wind ensembles. So I think my only real fraternisation with it has been over the pond, over here really. So it's been, and I have to say for me, it's been a real eye-opener to come to conferences like this and see all the different kinds of music available for, wind ensemble, because you simply just don't get exposed to that over in Britain. And as far as teaching, I mean, I don't teach on a regular basis, so I can't answer that question about students.
Can I interrupt just for a second? Because you haven't told us about your piece.
Thank you. They're doing my clarinet concerto. The University of South Carolina is doing my clarinet concerto tonight, and it's stunningly beautiful, the work they're doing. I can't wait to hear it. Their soloist is Joseph Eller on their faculty, and he's just a marvelous soloist. I'm really grateful to Scott, whom I see in the audience. He's doing 3 of our works. And my clarinet concerto was written for Håkan Rosengren. He's a Swede who lives in LA and in Texas. And he commissioned the work. And I'm looking forward to it. It's 3 movements. It's tribute to Gershwin and Copland and Bernstein, respectively, each of the 3 movements. So, thank you. I'm curious about, this is something that always fascinates me, is what we as composers and conductors have in common. For example, one thing that strikes me is that we're both constantly trying to balance predictability and surprise in our lives. Composers, we do that all the time. We're constantly doing that in our work. How much is too much unity, too little unity? Beethoven was such a master that I think about, the E minor theme in the 3rd Symphony that just shows up out of nowhere, and that great moment at the end of the 5th Symphony where you expect the recap of the big trombone entrance on the C major, and he tricks us and he goes somewhere else, and he makes us wait for that recap. Those wonderful surprises that he's able to season into a piece, and Mozart was a master at that too. So we're doing that, and conductors are doing the same thing. They're in rehearsals, they're balancing predictability and surprise, this sort of sense of routine which gives players comfort, but then constantly having to keep players challenged and keep them a little off guard and keep that element of surprise. So that's one thing that strikes me, and I'm just curious if there are other aspects that you find similar regarding the challenges and the day-to-day lives of composers and conductors. Maybe a tough question, and you can pass if you wish, but I'm asking of all of you.
Boy, that is a hard question. I think that all musicians, and certainly composers and conductors, we live in a world, not only what you were talking about, the idea of unity versus surprise, but one of compromises. And composers are constantly working with the materials that they may have up here, but also trying to work with actual live human beings if you're working with live players. And for me, I toyed in an electronic realm when I was a graduate student. And it was very seductive in a way, but ultimately it wasn't something that I found was a right match for me, because I like working with people. And I like the fact that music is something, a human connection, and can be beautiful and messy at the same time. And I think that aspect of writing a piece of music, the messiness of it, the chaos as you're sculpting an idea, and then working with something where you're compromising, but not in the sense of letting an idea go, is perhaps something that conductors also work with. You know, trying to create something, but also working with what you have. So I would think that would be one area of commonality.
I sometimes feel that composers are sometimes the worst interpreters of their own music. I've kind of seen that on several occasions. I can tell you, my colleague Don McKinney, who is the band director, his brain and my brain are completely wired differently. Now, of course, when I'm playing with an orchestra or when I'm playing with a band or something, and I hear something out of tune, yeah, it bothers me, you know. But I go and I listen to my piece, and you know, something is happening, and I'm thinking so much on the whole in terms of what's happening. And then Donald will come to me and say, well, what did you think about the balance there? And what about the intonation there and all that stuff? And I was like, I don't know. I really don't know. I was thinking more about where the line was going, and you know, how that was, you know, I'm thinking of completely different things than what most of you all are thinking about. So I find that very interesting. You know, even as a performer, you know, it bothers me when something's out of tune. But when I'm listening to my piece, like in the hall this morning, my brain isn't wired to think like that. So it's very strange. I'll give you another example. 2 weeks ago, I have this piece called Head Case, which is opera introspective, which is about the stroke I had when I was 29 years old. And it's been performed 4 times, and the 5th performance is coming up actually in North Carolina by the Winston-Salem Orchestra in October. Well, they couldn't find a percussionist for the Arizona Music Fest 2 weeks ago, so, you know, my friend Robert Moody, who conducts Winston-Salem, he conducts this thing, and he said, Brent, I need you to come and play the piece. Well, that was really hard. That was so strange to me, because I'm sitting there and I'm playing this percussion part, and while I'm playing my opera while I'm doing it at the same time, and I'm just trying my best, you know, to play the damn drum stuff, you know, and I'm thinking the whole time, like, okay, well, what about this? What's going on here? And how come the electronics aren't working? And why isn't the screen needs to be this way? And you know, and I'm thinking, you know, so that's where my mind is, you know. So it was really hard for me to even concentrate as a performer, you know. So I think that, you know, our brains, composers' brains, are really wired differently, and I think it's, if you're a good conductor of wind band and a composer at the same time, you're doing a lot of work and you're doing it very well. And I don't know how you do it. I guess you would be a good example, because so that's too many thoughts. There you go.
I had a couple different thoughts on this. One is that it seems to me in a wind ensemble performance, there's at least 4 entities. I mean, there's the composer, the conductor, the ensemble, and the audience. And there has to be this line of communication, which is a circle there. And a successful experience depends on at least the conductor and the composer being on the same page, and then the conductor conveying that to the third level, the musicians in the band, and then them conveying that convincingly to the audience. And kind of related to this is I remember early on when I began composing, I had been playing a lot of jazz in high school and college, and kind of thought of composing as slow motion improvisation. And I guess I still think of that to a degree because I work in a very spontaneous, intuitive way. What was I? I had some thought, but I guess I'm saying that the conductor needs to recreate the music that the composer has invented, and that they need to understand the whole shape of the piece. You know, I think it's important to work on details and intonation, but having a good understanding of the shape of the piece and important moments is critical. In my own conducting, I often do the reverse of something I do when I'm composing. Composing, I like to have the title first or early on, and I do a bubble diagram of the form of the piece. It's very, in 10 minutes you could sketch out a couple different diagrams for the shape of the piece and see if that's going to spark some good imagination. When I study a piece that I'm conducting, I reverse that and make a bubble diagram of the form so I can really understand how it's built and what the sections are, you know, maybe plan my rehearsals. So I think the roles are very much related and inform one another.
I'd like to sort of talk a little bit about writing, the way if you compose now from on a music program, I find half the problem with that is that you can start believing your own publicity. Because if you actually start to listen back to stuff that you're writing, you think, that's right, and the more you listen to it, the more you maybe start believing that this is what I meant. I find certainly that years ago when I was just writing with pencil and paper, you would do it and say, okay, well, I've got it in my head, that's ready, and you move on. And the next time the first time you hear it is when the first performance. So I think, I'm sort of treating your question slightly differently, but I think that now that I do work almost exclusively on Logic, actually, with various samples. And so by the time it comes to having the first rehearsal, you've got a pretty good idea in your head how it sounds. And that's not necessarily right, because you're limited to whatever the sounds are and whatever the balance is. And so when you go for first rehearsal, it can be quite a shock. And I think really what you have to do is to trust the conductor, because they have the score in front of them, and hopefully if you've written the score up meticulously, as I imagine most of us do, you know which lines want to come out. And you can start thinking, hey, this isn't sounding how I wanted it to, but you're wrong, because you're just hearing it maybe how the digital world has explained it to you. So I think it's very important to actually take a step back and let the conductor do the work to start off with. Certainly there will be things that you want to change. And I mean, I do find myself at rehearsals becoming quite obsessive about balance, with certain instruments, coming through. And I have to tell myself, well, that's not, you shouldn't be thinking back to what you've heard in your MIDI version, but you have to take the thing as a whole. So I think you're right, you said that it's a conductor is probably the best person to interpret your music, which is not to say that you shouldn't be able to change it as the whole thing goes along.
I just have a quick follow-up. Obviously, a score is not a piece of music. A piece of music is something that's played live. And I think that one thing composers and conductors share is a preoccupation with pacing and drama. I know that personally I spend a great deal of time worrying about shape and pacing. And it seems to me that in order to bring a piece off of the page and to make it come alive, that's something that composers and conductors both have to concern themselves with.
You all handled that question beautifully. And something you said, Brett, about how we listen differently. You're listening to one kind of thing and the conductor's listening to a completely different thing. I think that's really true. I like to, when I go to concerts sometimes, I like to just sit in the back and watch a couple of private teachers at my university, just to watch them at the concert. They'll, like one of them, be just sort of, casually sitting there, not really paying much attention to the piece, and then he'll sort of start to sit up. It's the oboe teacher, and he'll sit up, and then there's an oboe solo, and then the solo's over, and gradually Okay? But one thing that I like to disagree about is that well, not really disagree, but sometimes I find composers and conductors get into this sort of subliminal synergy where I'm about to make a suggestion. I've had this relationship with Carl St. Clair for decades, and I'm about to make a suggestion to the orchestra if he's doing one of my pieces, and he makes that exact same suggestion. And it doesn't just happen once or twice, it's a constant thing. And it just reminds me, I find that the older I get, the greater my appreciation for this sort of, this idea that we're both dealing with very similar challenges, conductors and composers, and also the greater my gratitude for the personal relationships that we get to forge. It's one of the, I think, the most fortunate things that we have as composers, that we get to forge these very personal relationships with conductors and performers. And I think it's one of our most treasured gifts. And that kind of synergy, that mutual love for the music, the shared ideals, give and take, and mutual desire to make beautiful things that we can't make by ourselves. They need us, we need them. And that's just something, as I've gotten older, I've grown to treasure that more and more. I just realize it's something we're very fortunate to be able to do for that reason. It sustains us, I think. Anyway, I want to ask a double question. I would like to know what you're writing now, what you're composing now, and what would you like, not necessarily now, but in the future, what would be your sort of pie-in-the-sky, heavenly commission? So a two-part question, what you're composing now, and what you dream about composing.
Right now I'm working on an orchestra piece. The South Carolina Philharmonic is celebrating its 50th season next year. And it's commissioned an orchestra piece, about 12 to 15 minute piece. So I'm working on that, or at least I think I'm working on it. In terms of kind of pie in the sky commission, are you talking specifically about winds or? You know, that's a tricky question for me. I think partly because of the way I compose, I like to have limitations. I like to be in a box in a way. I find, Stravinsky talks about this, but I find it liberating as a composer when I'm able to kind of make decisions about what I'm working on or the project, if there are instrumentation limitations, or certainly in composing when you make limitations, when you make decisions about the material that you're working with. I find it's more conducive for me creatively if I'm able to kind of make those decisions. That said, I think it would be interesting to do a project for film, a large project for film, but not exactly writing for film, not music for film, but rather a kind of collaborative effort with the filmmaker, such that the genesis of any kind of piece, whereas an amalgam of film and music, would be kind of thought out together, and that the music then would be written as a piece of music, and the film edited to the music, rather than the music's kind of serving the purpose of forwarding a narrative of the film. So that would be something more of a collaborative kind of thing. I don't know what that would take in terms of resources or time, and I don't know any filmmakers. So that would be a challenge for me. But I think that would be interesting, kind of Alexander Nevsky in a way, just a piece of music that is just an interesting piece of music in its own right, but that is a kind of collaboration with film.
Currently, I'm actually working on it a lot. I worked on it last night, and I've been working on it on the bus on the way here, actually. I'm doing all of the Beck song reader for New Music Raleigh. I don't know if you guys know who Beck is, but he's a pop artist. And he, instead of creating an album, he decided that he would release all 20 of his tunes on sheet music and let everybody else interpret them. So that's what I'm doing. I'm actually arranging / realizing his work for New Music Raleigh. And I'm also working on a film score to a documentary for one of my colleagues in the sociology department. So called Women of the Storm, which is about a bunch of women from New Orleans who went up to Washington, D.C. to protest
the lack of government action from Katrina. In terms of what I would like to, my dream commission, I have two. I think one, I would really like to do a symphonic work, actually, a symphony. That would be my first thing, a large, for wind band. Yeah, I would really like to do that. My second one would actually be symphonic winds, percussion, as the score to an opera about the rodeo from Angola prison in Louisiana. I have a really good idea about what I would like to do for the libretto of this thing, and I think that the symphonic winds would really, really work well for it. And that, and probably, you know, an accordion. So, because you gotta have occasion, and you know, so that's sort of what I would like to do.
When you sort of warned us about this question, I thought, well, what am I going to come up with? Something with trapeze and video projection and 3D. But really, you know, what I'd like to write is a piece that a lot of people are interested in playing. But to step back, having heard the Stravinsky last night, that's a piece that I'd like to do for something for chorus and large ensemble. Either wind ensemble or symphony, or who knows both. But my current project, you know, I just was very fortunate to have 5 weeks in Italy at this place called Bogliasco, a place composers go, and it's a fellowship thing. You get a studio, and they feed you very well. But like many of these things, you have to apply a year ahead of time. And I have no idea what I'm going to be writing a year from now. And but you have to make a very specific proposal. And of course, I was going to do 2 chamber pieces. One I finished a month before I left, and the other was delayed for various reasons. So I got there not knowing what I would work on. Wrote a short harp piece, and then this meteor flew over Russia on the 13th. That was like 3 days after I got there. But the same day as we had this asteroid whiz by inside the satellite belt. So I took that as a sign that I should write a piece called Contrail. And but then I had to decide what I'm going to write it for. And I was thinking wind ensemble, orchestra, or ensemble. And I decided at least to start with maybe a studied piece for the new music ensemble, which I direct, because I know I can get that played maybe this fall if I get the piece done. There just seemed a lot of imagery associated with the contrail and these meteors. Not that you would just write a soundtrack to a newsreel about it, but you could abstract different images during the process of this meteor entering our atmosphere. Lots of hurtling, fast music, some glowing stuff. You know, you could look at it at different distances. So those are my current thoughts about what I'm working on and going forward.
Currently, I'm just finishing about 3 projects, 2 of which you could kind of call bread and butter, if you like. In England, we have a system of exams for instruments called the grades 1 to 8, which starts from beginner up to sort of college standard. And there are 2 examination boards there. And I've been lucky enough to be commissioned by both examination boards to write a number of set pieces for the repertoire. I just did one for Trinity Guildhall, which involved writing 108 pieces for flute and saxophone, who were all different grades for kids to learn for their exams. I'm just finishing off a book now for the Associated Board. So these are kind of very specific things where you have to write pieces of different difficulty. So I just finished doing that. I'm also about to embark upon writing the music for a documentary series for the BBC about the National Trust. And the National Trust is an institution in Britain of national heritage of the countryside and houses of ancient heritage around the country. And this is a 6-program series, and I've been commissioned to write the music for that, which will be interesting because I want to try and get away from the idea of having pastiche music. You know, if you're talking about a sort of 17th century mansion or something, I've yet to decide which way it's going to go. I have to speak to the producer about that. But that'll be quite interesting, trying to write something original which doesn't get in the way, which is always the problem with when you're writing for documentaries. So that's a nice project. And I'm just finishing off a concerto grosso for string quartet and string orchestra, which has got quite a nice commission. And that's a 3-movement work. I'm just finishing off the 4th movement. It's been interesting actually to do something for strings with writing it alongside the ensemble I've just done for the wind equivalent. And that's it's a really interesting experience trying to fit in the kind of the different ways of scoring, which is obvious, I know, but the different sounds and that. What I'd really like to do, after having been here and filling up my head with some fantastic new pieces that I've heard, is to write a symphony for winds, just like Brett said. I mean, I'm absolutely bursting with ideas now to do it, and it's been, as I said earlier, a revelation to me to see what can be done with the wind orchestra, and so for me that would be top of my list at the moment, symphony for winds.
What about you, Frank?
I just finished David Zubey's dream piece. I just wrote a piece for chorus and orchestra. Big work that'll be premiered June 1st. And I'm now doing a saxophone concerto, which is a consortium of saxophonists being headed up by Cliff Lehman, who's the professor of saxophone at the University of South Carolina. I would love to open it up to your questions. If you have any questions for anyone here. There are buses to catch and there is barbecue to be eaten. I know that, but we do have just a couple of minutes for questions. Yes, sir.
So I have serious concerns about the future health as I go to public schools and I see dwindling and disappearing music programs. I'm constantly thinking about how we can continue to reach out to the larger culture, and as I feel that this will impact university wind ensembles in the probably near future. What directions might we go as we create new music to repair our connections to future generations of kids so that we can continue to do these things in the future?
That's a very serious question, and I'm sure I don't have an adequate answer, but I'll just share one thing that we're doing at IU is we have a program called Kids Compose, which is a multifaceted program involving kids from area schools writing melodies in the fall, and it's kind of a competition, and we get 100 entries or something, and ultimately we choose 8 of those, and then our students at IU write transcriptions, arrangements of those for both orchestra and wind ensemble, and then those are presented at the spring concerts in the musical arts center. We bus in kids from all over town, and so the kids, it's really a fantastic experience having their music realized on stage there.
Other questions?
My name is Christopher Bianco. My question is for John. I'm interested in a different kind of synergy between live music and film. And my question is, to your knowledge, is there some kind of Ableton-like software for film and or animation?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, I know things like Logic and Pro Tools allow you to import and to work with sounds with film, but yeah, and as Greg was saying, Ableton as well. I have really no experience working with film, so I'm not quite sure that the tools that would be done. I don't know if anyone else on the panel here.
I don't have any experience with it, but I think there's a program called Jitter that is maybe associated with Max and pairs with that, but you might look into Jitter.
Any other questions? Okay, please join me in thanking these